Welcome to Psychology Hub, your go-to space for exploring the fascinating world of the human mind. Whether you're interested in mental health, behavior, neuroscience, or the latest psychological research, we've got you covered. Dive into easy-to-understand videos that break down complex ideas, making psychology fun and accessible for everyone. Subscribe and join us on a journey to better understand how we think, feel, and act. What do neurons do? Have you ever imagined that every thought, action, or feeling you experience could be communicated just by pressing a button? It might sound simple, but that's essentially how your neurons work. They transmit all the electrical signals that control your actions, thoughts, and emotions. Picture this. You press a button and it sends out a quick ping, the same in volume and length every time. This simple ping can represent everything from, "Wow, it's cold in here," to "I love churros," to "I need air." This is exactly how neurons send signals in your brain. When a neuron is sufficiently stimulated, it sends an electrical impulse that travels down its axon to communicate with neighboring neurons. Here's the catch. Neurons only have one kind of signal, and it always has the same strength and speed. But what neurons can adjust is the frequency of these signals. A short burst of signals, like buzz, 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 might mean something minor, like a slight discomfort. But a longer burst, like buzz, 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 signals something more intense, like an emergency. Your brain decodes these signals by organizing them based on location, intensity, and urgency. This helps you distinguish between something as simple as turning up the thermostat or something much more serious, like needing to call for help when in danger. This electrical impulse is called an action potential, and it's at the heart of everything your nervous system does. It's one of the most fundamental processes in biology, and it's happening inside your body right now. Let's dive deeper into how it works. Your body as a bag of batteries. Before we talk about how neurons communicate, let's take a quick look at electricity. Imagine your body is like a big sack of batteries. Okay, maybe you don't actually look like a battery, but electrically, your body functions in a similar way. Overall, your body is electrically neutral, with equal amounts of positive and negative charges. But inside your cells, those charges are unevenly distributed. Since opposite charges attract, we need membranes, barriers that keep positive and negative charges separated until we're ready to use the energy they create when they come together. Think of a battery sitting idle. It has both positive and negative ends, creating the potential to release energy. But nothing happens until it's connected to something like a flashlight or a toy, where the charges can flow and convert that stored energy into light or motion. Similarly, your neurons store electrical potential, waiting for the right signal to trigger action. How electricity works in your nervous system. Now that we know a bit about electrical principles, let's apply them to the nervous system. When a neuron is resting, it's like a battery waiting to be used. At rest, the inside of the neuron is negatively charged compared to the outside. This difference in charge is called the resting membrane potential, and it sits around negative 70 millivolts, AMV. But what creates this imbalance? On the outside of the neuron, there are plenty of positively charged sodium ions, Na+. Inside, the neuron contains potassium ions, K+, also positive, but mixed with larger negatively charged proteins. Because there's more sodium on the outside than potassium on the inside, the neuron's interior remains negative in comparison. This state is called polarization, meaning the neuron is charged and ready to fire. The sodium-potassium pump, keeping the charges separate. How do the ions get separated in the first place? That's where the sodium-potassium pump comes in. This protein sits across the neuron's membrane and actively transports sodium ions out while bringing potassium ions in. For every 2 potassium ions it pumps in, it pumps out 3 sodium ions. This creates a difference in the concentrations of ions, making the outside of the neuron more positive. This imbalance of ions generates what's called an electrochemical gradient. Nature, of course, wants to restore balance, which creates the energy needed to trigger neuron activity. But for that to happen, ions need to move across the membrane. Types of ion channels. Voltage-gated, ligand-gated, and mechanically gated neurons have special ion channels in their membranes. These are proteins that act as gates, allowing ions to pass through when certain conditions are met. There are three primary types of ion channels in neurons. Voltage-gated channels. These open when the membrane reaches a certain voltage. For instance, sodium channels open when the membrane hits around negative 55 millivolts, the threshold, starting an action potential. Ligand-gated channels. These open when a specific molecule, usually a neurotransmitter, like serotonin or dopamine, binds to the channel. Mechanically gated channels. These open in response to physical forces, like stretching of the membrane. Once these channels open, ions flow across the membrane, moving from areas of higher concentration to lower concentration, driven by the electrochemical gradient. This flow generates the electrical signals that allow neurons to communicate. Graded potential versus action potential. Not all electrical responses are the same. When a few ion channels open and a few ions move, the change in the neuron's charge is small and localized. This is called a graded potential, and it doesn't travel down the axon, it's just a local change. However, to send a signal the length of the neuron, from the cell body to the axon terminals, you need a larger, more significant change in charge. This is the action potential, depolarization, starting the action potential. A neuron at rest has its membrane potential at about negative 70 millivolts. When the neuron is stimulated by an external signal, like a touch, it causes sodium ions to flow in, making the inside of the neuron a bit more positive. If the change reaches a certain threshold, around negative 55 millivolts, the neuron reaches depolarization. At this point, voltage-gated sodium channels open wide, and sodium ions rush in, making the inside of the neuron briefly become positive, around plus 40 millivolts. This flips the charge, and the action potential begins. Repolarization, returning to rest. After depolarization, the neuron needs to restore its resting state. This process is repolarization. Voltage-gated potassium channels open, allowing potassium ions to flow out, helping restore the negative charge inside the neuron. Hyperpolarization, overcompensation. Sometimes, the neuron goes too far during repolarization. The membrane potential becomes even more negative than at rest. This is called hyperpolarization. The neuron briefly drops to around negative 75 millivolts before the ion channels close, and the sodium-potassium pump restores the resting state. Refractory period, preventing backflow. During the action potential, certain parts of the neuron can't fire again immediately. This is called the refractory period. And it ensures that the signal moves only in one direction down the axon, preventing it from traveling backward. Conclusion. So, here's how it works. Your neurons communicate with one simple signal, the action potential. The strength of the signal stays the same, no matter what the stimulus is. What changes is the frequency of those action potentials. A light touch results in fewer action potentials, while a stronger stimulus leads to more frequent action potentials. Neurons also vary in speed. Axons wrapped in myelin conduct signals faster because the myelin acts as insulation, allowing the signal to jump between gaps called nodes of Ranvier. This jumping process is known as saltatory conduction. That's how your neurons communicate. Stay tuned for the next part of this series, where we'll explore what happens when the action potential reaches the end of the neuron and needs to jump to another neuron. Review. Today, you learned that your body operates much like a complex battery. Neurons use ion channels to create electrical signals called action potentials. These action potentials travel through neurons from resting state to depolarization, repolarization, and sometimes hyperpolarization. All of this helps your body respond to the world around you. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to Psychology Hub for more insightful videos on the fascinating world of psychology. Feel free to adjust the details as needed. This version smooths out some of the explanations while keeping it engaging and educational.